Well, good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson tonight. This morning, a gunman opened fire on a group of Republicans practicing for the annual congressional baseball game, a charity. The shooter, who's a man called James Hodgkinson, was an enthusiastic progressive and a Bernie Sanders supporter who appears to have done this for ideological reasons. Before opening fire, Hodgkinson asked whether the baseball players were Democrats or Republicans. At this point, the only death is the shooter himself, but 5 other people were wounded badly in some cases. 2 Capitol Hill police officers, a Hill staffer, a lobbyist, and the House Majority Whip, Steve Scalise of Louisiana. Mr. Scalise remains in grave condition tonight in a Washington hospital. There are reports that the president will be visiting his bedside sometime this evening. We'll keep you updated on that. But this morning, in a depressingly familiar ritual, journalists and politicians wasted no time trying to score political points from the shootings. Blogger and Twitter buffoon David Frum may have been the quickest to the scene. As the rest of the country was waking up to the horrifying news of what had happened, Frum was busy writing his sermon. Quote, Virginia, no background checks, no licensing, no registration, no permit required for concealing of carried long guns, open carry long guns, and handguns. Well, it'd be funny if it wasn't so gross and absurd. A concealed carry permit for a rifle? What does that even look like? And by the way, Virginia does require a background check to buy a gun. But Frum was not alone. In a morning statement, Virginia Governor Terry McAuliffe claimed that 93 million people die every single day in this country thanks to gun violence. 93 million, more than a third of the country murdered every day of the calendar year. The governor said that multiple times. This is what happens, of course, when ignorant liberals talk about firearms, but it misses the point anyway. What happened today isn't horrifying because it was gun violence. It's horrifying because it was political violence, and therefore it threatens the basic stability of our country. That's why shooting a congressman for his party affiliation is a bigger deal than killing a man in a bar because he hit on your wife. They're both bad and immoral, but only one could potentially lead to civil war. Some hard left understand this, and that's why they support it, because political violence could lead to the dissolution of a country they despise, this country. Huffington Post writer Jesse Benn tweeted his approval of the Scalise shooting, quote, the world would be a better place without him, end of story. Benn's only criticism of the attack was its limited scale, quote, for violent resistance to work, it'd need to be organized. Individual acts can be understandable, but likely counterproductive or ineffective. Whoa. On the other side of the divide, some are looking to blame the media or Bernie Sanders for the shooting. It's an understandable temptation, maybe, but it's best resisted. The only person directly responsible for what happened today is the man who pulled the trigger. That said, there are some lessons we might be able to learn from what happened this morning. One is that in this volatile moment, and it is volatile, people with megaphones ought to be responsible about what they say. That means never excusing political violence under any circumstances. That means condemning shootings like this, but it also means riots, assaults, occupations, threats, any other attempt to achieve political goals through force ought to be condemned. Being responsible also means being intellectually honest and not implying you know more than you actually do know. If you believe, for example, that Russia had improper involvement in last fall's election, that's fine. Make your case. But don't accuse your political opponents of treason unless you have hard evidence that they committed treason. It seems obvious, but there are big ratings in conspiracy theories these days, and some can't resist. They should resist. Above all, though, don't dehumanize your political opponents. The people who disagree with you are still people. Politics is not a referendum on virtue. It is not a holy war. It's a debate about how best to run the country. Reasonable people can disagree on that. They have for hundreds of years. The other side isn't evil. They are wrong. More than anything, they are our fellow Americans, kin to us, and that means far more than any differing view on Obamacare or marginal tax rates or even Russia. If you keep that in mind, you won't lose your decency. Congressman Mo Brooks represents the state of Alabama. He was an eyewitness to today's attack, right in the middle of it, and he joins us now. Congressman Brooks, thank you for coming on tonight. So set the scene for us. You were practicing, and then what happened?
Well, I was on the third base side of home plate. We had a batting cage, which has a cover on it to prevent foul balls from leaving the field. And I was swinging 2 or 3 bats to warm up. I was on deck. Congressman Rodney Davis was actually hitting. A fellow by the name of Will Batson, who's from the Tennessee Valley, my congressional district, graduated from University of North Alabama, was pitching on the mound. And all of a sudden I hear this loud explosion, a bang. First I thought it was a car backfire or something of that nature. Right. Turned around and then I saw the gun. It was a rifle. I saw the barrel. It was pretty close to the chain link fence, shooting through the holes in the chain link fence. At the time, the shooter was aiming towards shortstop, second base, right field. And it occurred to me that if I could see him, he could see me if he shifted his focus a little bit to his right. That prompted me to realize I was not, I had a baseball bat. That wasn't going to be very good against a rifle.
No.
And I needed to find some kind of cover, so I ran around the batting cage and face first into the ground on the first base side of the batting cage, where he couldn't see me, but all I had was a plastic shield around the bottom of the batting cage that was preventing him from seeing me.
So how long did this go on?
I thought it was 3 to 5 minutes, but I've seen video that is at least 6 minutes. That suggests to me that the entire event was probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 6 to 10 minutes. The number of shots fired, at least 50, maybe as many as 100. I'm sure we'll get a report. Things are happening so fast when you're in that kind of environment, it's very difficult to accurately calculate the passage of time or to keep track of the number of bullets. At some point, there are about 3 or 4 of us lying on the ground near home plate on the first base side of that batting cage where he can't see us, but it's plastic he can shoot through. And it occurred to me, and I imagine it occurred to some of the others, that we would not be in a very good position if the shooter walked around the third base dugout towards home plate. He's on the outside of the fencing, and we'd be lying on the ground with absolutely no defense, 10 to 15 feet away from a guy with a rifle. So we made the collective decision to sprint into the first base dugout. Fortunately, it's recessed a foot and a half, 2 feet. And we were diving in that dugout just as fast as we could. When I got down there, I didn't even remember that it was Jeff Flake's next to me. I was at the far end of the dugout. I was here. Jeff Flake was here. Zach, who got shot, was next to Jeff. And then Coach Roger Williams from Texas, also a congressman, was on his other side. And I said, Zach, you're hit. And, you've been young, teenager, 20s, we didn't think we're kind of immortal. And he said, oh, it's no big deal. And I went, dude, you've been shot. This is a big deal.
Where was he shot, Congressman?
He was shot in the calf. Apparently the bullet had gone all the way through and he was bleeding. And so I took off my belt and said, look, you've got to have a tourniquet. Reached over there in that direction with the belt. I don't remember, quite frankly, if Jeff took it from me and gave it to Zach, but eventually with the 3 of us, it got placed on his leg near his knee, and later on, after everything was over with, it looked like he was still wearing that belt to provide a tourniquet to help minimize the blood loss.
That is just remarkable. And very quickly, where was Congressman Scalise during all this?
Well, when I ran to get around behind the batting cage, the first thing I heard, simultaneous with the first half dozen shots, taking 2 or 3 seconds, was active shooter, bam, bam, bam. Steve Scalise yelled something. I don't know if it was shooter or I'm hit, but I recognized his voice in that chaos. And then as I'm running around the batting cage, I see Steve on the ground in the second base position on the infield dirt, trying to pull himself on the ground towards right field. And of course, there's not much we can do when all we have are baseball bats and gloves and baseballs, and we're trying to secure ourselves. Fortunately, the shooter did not seem to shoot anymore at Steve Scalise, although he did hit one person, Matt, by a number of times. And one of the other startling moments is I'm on the ground. We've got the tourniquet on Zach. I'm right next to the exit to the dugout where there's only one entrance and exit. We've got a 10-foot fence all the way around this place. And if the shooter gets to that exit, we're all boxed in with no place to go. And I'm lying on the ground eating dugout dirt along with some of my comrades. And all of a sudden, bam, bam, bam. And it was I'm thinking, oh my goodness, another shooter. I look up, and it was a Capitol Police officer by the name of David Bailey, and he was using the cinder block dugout as a defensive position, and it was a tremendous feeling of joy.
Yes.
To see a good guy shooting back. It seemed like it took forever to engage, but once the engagement took place, our Capitol Police officers were excellent. They were heroic. And if they had not been there, it could have been a massacre because we were pinned inside what was basically a 10-foot fence.
It's I cannot believe you're a U.S. congressman telling me this story, and it's real. The whole thing is totally shocking, even now, all these hours later. Congressman, thank you for your account of that. It's amazing.
Thank you, Tucker.
For more information on what exactly happened, we are joined by Fox News Chicago correspondent Mike Tobin. Hey, Mike.
Hey there, Tucker. Angry little man, pushy little bastard. That's the way one neighbor describes Hodgkinson to our producer on the ground in Belleville, Illinois. It was his way or no way. That's who he was, the neighbor went on to say. Now, Hodgkinson had his run-ins with police. In March of this year, a resident in St. Clair County, Illinois, called the sheriff because Hodgkinson was around his house firing a rifle.
He pointed the rifle towards the center of the timber back there and started shooting across the field, you know, and it was a high-powered rifle, and I thought, good grief, there's houses over there and everything. And I yelled at him. I said, hey, you know, stop shooting over there. There's houses over there and everything. And I didn't get any kind of no notion from him that he heard me or that he even cared.
Now, when the deputy arrived, Hodgkinson produced a valid firearm owner's ID, so the deputy just told him to stop. Now, there's an extensive report from 2006. Apparently, Hodgkinson's daughter went over to a neighbor's house and refused to come home. So over the course of 2 days, according to police records, Hodgkinson went to the house, broke a door, punched a woman in the face, fired a round from his shotgun, hit a guy with a stock from the gun, pulled his daughter to the floor by her hair, attempted to drag her from a car. There were also charges in separate instances, resisting arrest and drunk driving. Now, Hodgkinson also had his political side. He wrote letters to a local paper ranting about taxes, that the rich needed to pay their fair share. His Facebook page is now taken down, but it was riddled with anti-Trump, anti-Republican comments. His page had a big picture of Bernie Sanders with the slogan, Democratic Socialism explained in 3 words, we the people. Senator Sanders reacted.
Let me be as clear as I can be. Violence of any kind is unacceptable in our society, and I condemn this action in the strongest possible terms.
The Illinois Policy Institute dug up Hodgkinson's voting record. He voted Democrat in 2008, 2012, and 2016. Tucker?
Mike Tobin, thanks for that background. Congressman Roger Williams represents Texas. He's the coach of the Republican baseball team. One of his staffers was shot today, but doctors say he's expected to be all right. Congressman Williams joins us tonight. Congressman, thanks a lot for coming on. First, to the man on your staff who was shot, can you give us an update on his condition?
Yeah, Zach Barth was shot in the leg, as you heard from Congressman Brooks. He's doing great. We've got his father up from Houston tonight to be with him. He just got released from the hospital, so he's doing well, and our prayers are answered that he's made it through this, and we're happy for that.
How old is Zach Barth?
Zach is probably about 25 years old, University of Texas graduate, works in my office, does a really good job.
That's just unbelievable. Now, there was security at the scene with the members there, but I can't imagine it had ever occurred to you something like this could actually happen.
No, you know, we've been playing out there for, well, at least since I've been in Congress in 2012. We've been out there every morning at 6 o'clock till 8 o'clock. Never thought about anything like this happening, and of course when it happened today, I was over there hitting, I was on the third base side by the batting cage, hitting ground balls to Trent Kelly, and not knowing that this shooter I was probably 20 feet, 20 yards just away from this fella. And when I hit my last ball to Kelly, I went around and started hitting to Steve Scalise. And when I hit my first fungo ball to Steve, the shots went off. And I, like Mo Brooks, thought it was probably a car backfiring, but then they started coming at such great pace that everybody yelled, he's a shooter, he's got a gun, take cover. And naturally, I just charged toward the first base dugout, which actually is about probably 6 feet deep in the ground. If it hadn't been 6 foot deep in the ground and flat, it would have a whole different story. But I literally, myself, I just dove into the concrete dugout. I tore my leg up, but when I landed, I was there with Flake and I was there with Mo, and then all of a sudden Zach comes in from the outfield, running in from the outfield, and he just jumps right into, I'm holding him all of a sudden. We're holding each other. He's bleeding. And that's when Mo and gave the belt to us to make a tourniquet to keep the blood down. And we just held on. And but it was a moment that, I'll tell you, as we've already said, without the Capitol Police, without the bravery of these Capitol Police, I think that probably it would have been a good chance all of us would have been killed. And the other thing was the third base side that he tried to get in the field. The third base side gate was locked. If it had not been locked, he could have just come into the field.
You must have been completely confused when this happened.
Well, it happened so quick, but it was long. It seemed like it went forever. And I've read reports that it was probably 60 rounds. And it was a time before we could hear friendly fire. I remember Jeff Flake and I were just totally together. And the shots were coming just one after one. And finally, where I looked up, I could see the Capitol Police were standing right above the dugout, and they started firing, and we were yelling, "Is that our fire? Is that our fire?" And then shortly thereafter, it got quiet. But none of us were sure it was over yet. But then the Capitol Police got us and put us in a staging area to make sure everybody was safe. And the rest is history. It's a sad moment for our country, but the baseball game must be played tomorrow. I talked to Speaker Ryan along with Congressman Barton and Dole. We need to play that baseball game tomorrow and let these people know that they just can't change the way we live in this country.
Amen. You'll have more people watching that than ever before. Congressman, thank you for coming on tonight and telling us what you saw, and I'm glad your staffer's okay.
Thank you, Tucker.
Well, a few sick people on the left have defended the shooting today. Even those who haven't have defended mock beheadings and campus riots. Are they connected? Mark Stein joins us in a minute to talk about shifting attitudes toward political violence in this country. Also, we'll talk to a former mayor of Alexandria who spoke with the shooter countless times at the YMCA in Alexandria, Virginia. Our live coverage of the congressional baseball field attack continues up ahead.
Many lives would have been lost if not for the heroic actions of the two Capitol Police officers who took down the gunman despite sustaining gunshot wounds during a very, very brutal assault. Melania and I are grateful for their heroism and praying for the swift recovery of all victims.
Most people on both sides had the sense to condemn today's shooting in Virginia for the atrocity that it was, but most people isn't everybody. Earlier, we showed you a Huffington Post writer who praised the shooting today in public. There are more people like him out there, and there are far more people who have in recent months been seduced by the lure of political violence because it's just easier and emotionally satisfying. Among them, CNN's Kathy Griffin, mock beheading the president 2 weeks ago. In New York City, New Yorkers are enjoying a take on Julius Caesar, the Shakespeare play, where a Trump lookalike is stabbed to death. Mark Stein is an author and columnist. He's been warning about the growing acceptance of political violence on the left, and he joins us tonight. Mark, is it too simple to connect the dots between this growing rhetoric of violence and what we saw today?
I don't think it is, Tucker, because I think what they all have in common, going right back to the dawn of this administration, is that the left wants to denormalize and dehumanize, to use your words, its political opposition. And they do that in a variety of ways. So, for example, when Charles Murray wants to give a speech at Middlebury College, they have to have a riot. They don't have a debate in which they demolish his argument. They don't want to win the debate. They want to prevent the debate taking place.
That's right.
They want to label somebody a hater. If you happen to think that Obamacare is not the best public policy, it's because you want grannies and urchins to die. And once you do that, you're basically saying there's no form of civilized political discourse possible with your opponent, and the logic of that is that instead you riot and you beat them up, as they do at Middlebury, you poison them, as happened to Robert Spencer, who's well known to this network when he gave a speech in Iceland recently, or you open fire on them. And you make politics impossible if you do that.
Because you're not debating someone who disagrees with you, you're debating someone who's immoral. It's the faithful versus the infidels. There's a religious quality to the way they approach politics. Do you notice that?
Yes, I think so. And I think if you have people like the Southern Poverty Law Group, for example, which has become fabulously wealthy by labeling everyone they disagree with as a hate group. Well, if you keep calling everybody a hater, and in fact, if the raison d'etre of your organization is to call people haters, you're the hater. And I would actually like to disagree with the tone of what we've heard today, including in the last hour from Martha McCallum and Brit Hume, when they're talking about unity and will this unity last and all the rest of it. Obviously, the unity won't last because ultimately Rand Paul has very little that unites him with Bernie Sanders. We don't actually need unity. We need robust, civilized disunity, where people honestly recognize that they disagree with each other on healthcare, on immigration, on Islam, on transgendered bathrooms, and a bazillion other things, but that doesn't make the other person a hater. And you have to, and simply put, the left has to be willing to actually engage in debate with people it disagrees with.
I wonder if that reflex, the reflex to debate, is atrophying on the left. I remember liberals as kind of champion and skilled debaters. There were a lot of them when I was a kid. Now it's very hard to find one who will defend his positions.
Yeah, and I think you actually get out of shape like that. I mean, if you watch these bozo imams on Al Arabiya or whatever, they talk a good talk, and then the minute they're up against some feminist Muslim from Belgium, the bozo imam is just reduced to nothing, because he's actually, he hasn't held an honest debate in his entire life. And I think that's actually the problem here, is that simply by pointing fingers and labeling people, your own skills are atrophying. And we see that on the left. But, you know, they've got to own this. It's not edgy comedy to hold up a severed head of your political opponent. There's a very useful American, and I think it applies more to the left because they're so invested in big government. Politics is everything. So when you're out of power, it's not just the swing of the pendulum and the other guys are in for a couple of years. It's the end of everything to you. And there's a useful American expression which always rings a little odd to my foreign ears, and that's get a life. And actually, get a life is good advice. If the person you want didn't make it to president, tough. You can have another go in 4 years. In the meantime, take up flower arranging, take up tap dancing, take up dog sledding, get a life, and it won't be that big a deal.
That's very deep, and I really want to see the imam versus the Belgian feminist. Next time, give me the web address. Mark Stein, great to see you, as always.
Always a pleasure, Tucker.
Thank you, Mark. Another shooting means another chance for the left to push for gun control. Of course, it happened within minutes of this shooting. Up next, we'll talk to a New York City councilman who has that position. Stay tuned. News produced fevered calls for new restrictions on gun ownership and gun rights. Jumaane Williams is a member of the New York City Council. After today's shooting, he put out a statement calling for, quote, common sense gun legislation that addresses the supply and demand for guns. He also demanded new laws, quote, combating the leadership of the NRA as they try to deceive people into thinking they're simply working to protect Second Amendment rights. Councilman Williams joins us tonight. Councilman, I guess the obvious question is, what gun law would have prevented the shooting today?
I think it's a combination of things. First, my prayers for Representative Scalise and his family. I know it's in critical condition. I think it's a confluence of things that we need in preventing this type of supply. That's the supply side. These supply of guns are going into these communities. We have to prevent it. This man apparently had a criminal history. Why did he have access to these guns so readily? We also need to prevent gun laws like the ones that NRA.
May I answer? I know the answer to this. So he bought his gun legally. He had a federal background check.
Sure.
He was not convicted of any crime, and so of course you can't punish people without convicting them under our system.
Sure.
And he lived in a rural area, so it's not like guns were flooding into his community. He went and bought it at a gun shop, as he's allowed to do. So again, since you used this shooting as a way to promote your political views on gun control, what gun law would have prevented this shooting?
So my answer to that question is one, as I said, there's supply and demand. The supply side is all of the illegal guns that we talk about were legal at some point. So there's too many points of purchase and too much ability to get unfettered access to guns. I believe and understand he had 2 guns. I don't know necessarily that you need 2, 3, and 4 guns. There are people who repeat.
But he had, he had a rifle, and he shot a lot of people with a rifle. Five people with this rifle. He got it legally again. So I guess the point I'm making is there are hundreds of millions of firearms in the United States. The Second Amendment guarantees the right, as translated by the Supreme Court, for people to buy them. How do you stop gun crime or shootings like this short of confiscating every gun, which obviously is not going to happen?
You don't have to confiscate
So
every
how would
gun.
you have prevented this crime? I mean,
but there are laws that could be put in place that minimize the access to guns, minimize access to semi-automatic weapons that people won't even entertain. There is research that can be done with the CC to see what those laws are. But the Republicans and the NRA block that kind of
Okay, but I don't know
research.
why you're waiting for the NRA to do your work for you or the CDC. Now, you're an elected official, and you're using a tragedy. You're leveraging a tragedy in order. Of course you are. You're sending out a press release in the middle. People are still being carted to the hospital saying, we could have prevented this. So I'm asking you the obvious question, which is how?
You're speaking to a council member who's a proud member of the city council, who's had a voice in helping New York City be one of the safest cities in the country. So there should be people listening to what's happening.
Well, congratulations. But we're talking on a day about a mass shooting that took place in Alexandria at 7 a.m. this morning, and you used that occasion to send out this press release for the 4th time. What law would have prevented this?
We're talking about the 159 other mass shootings that have happened in this country.
So you'll concede nothing you're proposing would have stopped this?
No, I'm saying we're talking about the 27,000 Americans that have died since the beginning of this year alone. And I'm saying the gun violence is occurring because there's a supply. And what I'm saying, there is combinations of gun laws that we should put forth and discuss. I'm saying that we should be allowed to just even research.
Look, you're allowed to say whatever you want on this show. Any crazy idea you have, this is an open forum. I'm going to try for a 5th time, then I'm going to completely give up. Because what you're doing is you're steering the conversation to the general when I would like to bring it back to a very specific thing.
It has to be brought to a general because this is not about one incident.
Because you don't have a real answer. That's why.
No, because this is one incident that you want to focus on. And
so there are millions of high-capacity so-called assault rifles, 5.56, 223, perhaps a rifle used today, that kind of rifle.
There's no one who's listening
What do you do with those guns?
There's no one who's listening who can say there is not too much access to guns in this country, and the correlation to how many people die from gun violence in this country than to anyone else is huge. And so we have to have a discussion about gun laws.
I'm trying to have a discussion right now, and I'm not making much headway because you're bringing it back to these banal bumper stickers. What do you do about the millions of these rifles in this country?
Access to high-capacity weapons. Access to purchase weapons if you have criminal history.
You're not hearing me. They're already there. What do you do? Do you ban them? Do you confiscate them?
How about we stop first? How about we get a stopgap and then have a discussion?
A stopgap, what does that mean?
We can't even have the discussion.
What is that? We can have a discussion.
Hold on. The CDC can't even do research to answer your question because the NRA and the Republicans won't let them. How about we start there? How about allowing the CDC to do research on this issue?
I invited you on hoping you'd have something interesting to say.
I do.
And you're giving me the same talking points about the CDC. We're having to, the floor director's telling me we're out of time. Last question. We have all these rifles out there. Should we confiscate them or not?
That's not the question. The question is how do we prevent the supply of guns into these communities?
Okay. Mr. Williams, I appreciate it.
Thanks
for coming on. Up ahead, 2 more congressmen will join us to talk about today's shooting and its aftermath.
Now is a great
obstruction of justice in relation to his firing of FBI Director Jim Comey. They said that investigation was not underway until Comey got fired, and now it is. We know this, you won't be surprised to learn, from unnamed officials familiar with the matter. In other words, from leaks, and like past leaks, there's no evidence of a crime here, just the innuendo-filled leak of an investigation. We asked film director Oliver Stone about this, actually, during a conversation we had right before air tonight. Here's part of what he said. The investigation into Trump, headed by former FBI Director Robert Mueller, apparently FBI agents are leaking details of that investigation to the press. And you're seeing leaks from all the different intel agencies against the administration. Seems like they're trying to change their policies.
That's correct.
Does that surprise you?
Well, the overtness of it does. If the investigation were to continue, which it probably will, I think that they have to go back to the origins of that leak in January. Who put out that information? Who gave it to the New York Times or Washington Post back channel? You have to ask these questions.
Well, that turned out to be a far more interesting interview than I anticipated, speaking for myself. We had a long talk with Oliver Stone. The whole thing's going to be airing tomorrow night at 8 p.m. Eastern. It's worth watching. Well, the Republican baseball team was not the only one practicing for tomorrow's congressional game. At the time of the shooting, the Democratic team was holding its own practice when word of what happened reached them. Team members huddled to pray for their Republican colleagues. Congressman Mark Veazey of Texas was at that practice, while Senator Jeff Flake of Arizona was at the scene of the shooting and provided first aid to Steve Scalise. Both of them join us tonight. Thank you all both for coming on. First to you, Senator, how is Congressman Scalise tonight?
You know, we just got back from the hospital a bit ago, and he's gone through surgery. His wife had just arrived from Louisiana, and he's still in critical condition. They wanted to speak with, obviously, his family before they talk about his condition to others. So that's what hospitals do, and I think we ought to respect that. But obviously, it was a serious injury, and he's in critical condition, but obviously, he's a tough guy and a fighter.
Ah, poor guy. He's a nice man. Congressman Veazey, you were right nearby practicing. Can you set this scene for us? People aren't familiar with these fields. Where were you relative to this?
So the Republicans practice in Alexandria, which is in Virginia, of course. Democrats, we practice at Gallaudet University, which is actually in D.C., and we were in the outfield, and our coach, Mike Doyle, congressman from Pennsylvania, he called us in. We hadn't finished our rotations for batting practice yet, and we all ran in thinking, why is he calling us in already? And he told us that there had been shots fired at the Republican practice, and they wanted us to all sort of huddle up by the dugout to be safe. And then someone on the team pulled their cell phone out and was on Twitter and said, oh my God, they're saying that Steve Scalise has been shot. And it was just a very sobering, sad moment, and you know, we all wanted to pray and still are praying for Steve Scalise and hoping that he gets through this. I know Steve well, have met his family, and just really just hoping and praying for him right now. That's all we can do.
I think it's fair to say that the nicest members of Congress play baseball. I've always noticed that. So Senator, you provided first aid to people who were shot this morning. What happened?
Well, we wanted to get to Steve earlier. One of the most difficult parts of that horrifying 10 minutes was being in the dugout. We were providing first aid to one of the staff members who had been shot. Mo Brooks had a belt that he took off, and we fashioned a tourniquet to try to staunch the bleeding there. But knowing that we needed to get to Steve, he had dragged himself off of the infield about 10 or 15 feet into the outfield to try to be further away from the shooter. But we couldn't leave the dugout because bullets were going overhead the whole time. And finally, when somebody yelled the shooters down, I ran out, and then another member followed who happens to be a surgeon from Ohio, and Brad and I administered first aid for another 10 or 15 minutes.
I'm just getting in my ear now that we have news that President Trump has arrived at the hospital where the Majority Whip Steve Scalise is apparently with his family. He's pulled up. There's a pool with him. We have a camera there. Did you know this was going to be happening, Senator Flake?
Not when we were at the hospital. I heard when we got back to the Capitol that he was going to go. I think that's a great gesture. I'm glad he's there.
And there was another man who works for Tyson Foods who was injured also quite badly, I think hit a number of times. Do you have any update on his condition?
We don't. We don't. He obviously, yes, from the looks of it, you know, at the field, he really took the brunt of it. A couple of shots to the chest, and but obviously he was fighting, and I think his condition is critical as well. But we'll see. Obviously, great surgeons and great medical personnel are treating him.
Congressman Veazey, really quickly, you all playing tomorrow?
Yes, yeah, playing tomorrow. This is my first time playing in the game, and I'm really happy that you know, Speaker Ryan and the leaders of Congress decided that the game needed to go on. I think that we need to show America that we're going to come together, do this bipartisan event, and play baseball. Of course, we're going to be competing against each other very hard tomorrow. But I do think it's very important that we go out there, show solidarity, show that we're together on this, and have a good time playing America's pastime.
Good for you guys for doing that. Thank you both very much. Congressman Senator, thank you.
Thank you.
Well, the shooter today was killed by police. We're still trying to learn as much as we can about him. Up next, we'll talk to the longtime mayor of Alexandria, Virginia, who, as it turned out, saw the shooter almost every morning for weeks at the YMCA. A first-hand account. We'll be right back.